To say global communications is a big job is an understatement. The United Nations estimates there are 7.7 billion people on Earth. Those folks are residents of one of 195 countries and speak one of the 7,111 languages currently in use. As a communicator in a global role, you have to balance cultures, messaging, customs, mediums, and timing to make the organizational story sing through the noise. How are you supposed to engage and inspire a colleague around the world when you can't get Steve and Ops to respond to your calendar invite from down the hall? How do you balance the demands of headquarters with the needs of your diverse employee audience? Today on the Internal Comms Procast, we hear from Lenovo's Erin Bergamo Tacy. Erin will give advice to help you through the difficult task of communicating across countries and cultures. She will show you why empathy and relationship building are your secret weapons to global comms success.
You can't genuinely represent all the markets and countries in which we operate. You need to make sure that you're listening to those people that live and work in those countries and are on the ground and experiencing it every day.
Circle is a proud sponsor of the Internal Comms Procast. Circle helps internal communicators evolve from order taker to strategist with their suite of easy-to-use tools. Circle's automated email creates, personalizes, and sends your staff newsletter. With Circle, internal communicators can spend less time copying and pasting and more time engaging their audience. Greatness awaits. Request a demo at circle.com. That's CERKL.com. Welcome to the Internal Comms Procast. I am your host, Barry Williams. Since 2001, this week's guest has been communicating with audiences around the world, first for Cisco systems and now for Lenovo. Lenovo is truly a global company with staff in more than 160 countries, $43 billion in revenue, hundreds of millions of customers, and 4 devices sold per second.
My name is Erin Bergamo Tacy, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Lenovo's Data Center Group. I started my career in public relations right out of university and grew my communications expertise from there. I had an opportunity after several years of both agency and corporate side to be asked to interview for an executive communications role at Cisco Systems. And I worked really closely with our chief strategy officer, running all his communications, and that grew from there. Part of that role included internal communications, and we grew that practice within Cisco to a fairly robust internal and employee communication strategy. So I really honed my expertise and learned a lot about employee engagement and internal communications through those opportunities, and it's just continued since.
Prior to her current role at Lenovo, our guest was the Executive Director of Worldwide Communications for Lenovo's Data Center Group, overseeing all internal and external communications, including messaging and positioning, public relations, industry analyst relations, executive communication and coaching, employee engagement, crisis communication, and social media. Although she hails from the Bay Area, Erin has lived and worked outside the U.S., something she's a big fan of for any communicator. Erin says working with worldwide employee audiences has taught her valuable lessons. While working internationally for Cisco, Erin learned that not every message is right for every employee.
Living and working in a different country or in a global environment really helped me understand that not all communications are relevant for all people or for all cultures. So in my former company, they had a very strong corporate headquarters, and we created a lot of information and a lot of content that was pushed from the corporate out into the different markets and the different countries in which we operated in. And I was living and working in one of those countries, but I was reporting centrally to that organization. So I was a bit of a squeaky wheel on this. But what I started to see and experience is, even things like a communication about a fun activity or an offsite or a volunteer experience or a competition to raise money for a certain charity organization, could be, when you send that to different countries and different cultures who either physically can't participate because they're not located in headquarters, or the charity that you're driving a competition around really only benefits the United States in this example, and Japan and, Bratislava to contribute their money to driving fundraising for March of Dimes, which doesn't have any benefit to them in their country. It's just a mixed message. And so it not only is irrelevant to them, but it also is somewhat offensive. It can be on the negative side, right? That you expect me to help US babies, but you don't care about, my local needs. So we actually ended up changing the entire giving strategy and the platform at Cisco so that people, when they did volunteer their time or want to contribute, they could do that locally. And we had a vetting system for anybody could submit an organization to have the matching dollars. It not only is irrelevant to that audience, but in some ways has a negative impact on them because they are being conscious, they're being made aware that they're not being included in something. And so it really helped me think about what is this that we're trying to communicate? Who is the audience that needs to have this? What is the impact that is intended, and how are we going to measure it? And so just living outside of the United States and again, having teams around the world and hearing the impact of those communications on them really helped me think about how I drive internal communications across any organization.
If you shift into a global communications role, Erin says you're going to need to learn to listen to the folks on the ground. They might know best.
I think one of the things, when I first went and lived abroad, I was in charge of emerging markets, which are all the interesting countries. Well, there's lots of interesting countries, but you think about the Middle East or Africa, you think about Russia and Eastern Europe, you think about Latin America, where culturally they're very different from where I am from, originally from California and specifically Silicon Valley. I went into that role having a lot of experience in communications and thinking that I was being brought there to help drive that change because of my experience. And what I really learned was you need to take a step back and listen and learn to the people that you're working with, because in a lot of cases, they're going to know what's more relevant than you are. And that, from a leadership perspective, was eye-opening and a great learning experience, because you're never going to know everything, right? You're never going to be the best at every single piece of communications. I think we all have an innate desire to be experts in our field. And I think when you're building a global strategy, there is absolutely no way that you are going to be an expert in every single market in which we operate. There just isn't. That's okay. And I had to learn how to be okay with that and to leverage the team around me and their expertise. Now, I had a role to bring it all together and help drive the strategy and make sure that the company was moving that forward. But I think getting to a point in my career where I was like, okay, well, you're not always going to know best. And sometimes you just need to sit back and listen to your team and go with their recommendation. That was probably the biggest challenge and the biggest learning experience that I've had.
Despite the size of the companies Erin has worked for, one of her biggest career challenges is probably familiar to you.
I think there's still a large focus on all communications are good communications, and the more the better. And I think what we really need to start honing in on is targeted communications and getting the information in the hands of a very specific audience at the right time and through the right channels. So I think the biggest thing we can do right now in internal communications is do more targeting and more audience analysis and use that to drive our strategy. And it's really not about volume. It's around engagement and how do you engage internal employees versus just communicate at them. If you take something like PR or social media, and again, it's not about just volume and amplifying your message. It's about how do you bring people into a conversation? How do you engage them? If you can't be targeted and make sure that the information is useful for the audience that you're communicating to, they're going to turn you off. And that's the worst, right? Is you're creating a lot of great work and no one's seeing it or no one's paying attention to it, or you can't measure the impact. It's that understanding and getting your stakeholders and your business partners to understand that internal communications is really about driving interaction and not transactions. I think working with them to understand that internal communications is absolutely critical to a company's culture And that culture drives employee engagement, it drives happiness, it drives productivity, which actually has a very direct impact on the bottom line for any company. And it has to be invested in order to drive those results. So I think that education and that evolution of internal communications, again, beyond a transaction and more to an interaction, has probably been the biggest challenge. And it's an ongoing education that we have to keep doing.
Internal Comms Pro is proud to present the Rise and Shine series, coming to a city near you. Engaging and energizing, Rise and Shine events are designed with the IC Pro in mind. A featured speaker kicks off the event with a talk about the most current strategies, tools, and best practices. Then a panel of experts share how they applied the speaker's topic in their own organizations. You will leave with new ideas you can actually implement that next day. See where we are going to be next at internalcommspro.com/shine. Erin says effective, sustained measurement can help educate your leaders. At Lenovo, internal comms is measured like external communications. Here's what Lenovo comms teams measure and report.
So we look at awareness metrics, we look at consideration, we look at loyalty, so who's coming back to us unaided. And then another thing that we do that I've implemented since I've been here, but also had it at my former company, is something called the Employee Engagement Index. So we measure the employee engagement before and after every earnings result. And right after our earnings results, we always do employee all hands meetings. And so we're able to coordinate the two. So we're measuring their understanding of our strategy. We're measuring their knowledge of how do they impact that strategy. A number of things that we do consistently before our earnings announcements every quarter, and then we do the announcement, which we know impacts people's thoughts about the company. And then we do our all hands meeting where we dive on what's working, what's not working, where we want to be challenged, where we want to improve, and we measure it again after that. And so we do that consistently every quarter so that we can see if we're moving the needle on that confidence in the business. Now, the third thing that has come up, and I haven't quite figured out, to be honest, how to draw the correlation, but one of the things my leadership has asked me to do is, can we correlate some of that confidence and those engagement indices into employee retention? So are we having a direct impact, positively or negatively, on our employee retention as we drive employee engagement?
One of Erin's key global comms initiatives was developing a custom employee experience for data center employees and salespeople. This high-adoption internal application grew out of an external newsroom.
It's one technology platform. It's cloud-based. It's mobile-first. It's digital-first. And in the background, it's one content management system. So we've custom built it. Again, it's got our external-facing newsroom to drive membership and engagement, consideration, loyalty. But on the same CMS, we have two internal versions of that. And one is the data center group employee experience, and the second one is the sales community. Again, being very targeted for that audience on the types of information that they need. So it's an internal homegrown application that we've built. Again, it's cloud-based, so it can be personalized. You can get it on your phone. You can get it on your desktop. We can send notifications. Employees can actually post something that we call express yourself. So we want employees to engage and participate in the employee experience and share their own content so that we can drive, again, that sense of community, that engagement across teams, and just celebrate our culture and sort of build that into our everyday lives.
Erin warns that it hasn't all been easy. With so many different audiences, Erin and her team have had to shift the way they communicate. Instead of having a general information release across the company, Lenovo sends out talking points and empowers folks in each country to shape the talking points into messages that will work for their local audience. Here's how it works.
We established a different go-to-market process and strategy of saying, give me the value proposition, give me the top 3 key messages, and give me a presentation that I can, in some cases, externally share with customers or internally share with employees. All I need is those 3 things, and I need time to take that put it in context of my local strategy, and create something that's locally relevant, still tied. I call them sort of the commandments, right? What are the things you cannot change? We'll tie to that and stick with that. But then everything else that surrounds that and how we execute it, how we communicate it, that needs to be local. I had an employee from our corporate team once say to me, I'm working so hard to create all this content for you and your team to just wrap it up in a bow and hand it to you to go execute. And my response to her was, you're never going to be able to do that because you don't understand the market. You don't understand what works in that employee population. You need to give them, these three things and then let them go and localize it. It's not about translation. It's about creating content that is locally relevant. And so building a global strategy, you have to let go a little bit, and rely on some of the experts that sit around the world and then bring it back together.
Erin says one of the best things about serving a global organization is connecting people across the organization to make better business outcomes.
There are a lot of commonalities and similarities, and one of the things that I have the benefit of being able to do, because I talk to everybody across the organization and the teams, I can see the similarities and I can bring it together. And as a leader, that's really important, is to say, hey, you're having this issue in Germany. Have you spoken to your colleague in China who experienced the same thing, 6 months ago? And so I think, again, it's more of that openness to understanding that not everything can be controlled and run from the center, that really building a global strategy is going to require you to get close to the people that actually live and work in those markets and take the best of what they're doing and bring it back and leverage it across the team, but also help them. I mean, there are things that you can do from the center to help guide them.
Many internal comms pros are working to elevate their position. Erin says that letting go of some unnecessary control and getting away from reactionary tactics can help you begin to get more strategic.
Focusing on your strategy, putting everything in context, and focusing on your business outcomes. I think what tends to happen today is, and hopefully not on every level, but I do think people tend to start with execution and tactics first. And I think an area of growth is that audience analysis or even perception audits, right? Who is your target audience? What do they understand about what you want to communicate today? What do you want them to know, right? Or what are those behaviors even want to change in the future? What are the barriers to getting them to that? And then you build your strategy. So it's moving from, somebody coming to me and saying, I need a video to talk about X, to, well, what are you actually trying to accomplish? And do you need to drive change in the organization? Is this just to inform somebody of, a new program, or are you trying to drive an action? Because I think unless you ask those questions, you're going to be an order taker, and you're going to start with the tactic. I need a video. I need an internal memo. I need a newsletter. And what happens is that it's very disconnected. And so I think we need to train ourselves to think again about what's the context of what we're trying to share. What are the outcomes we need to drive? And then we'll come back and tell you what we think the best recommendation for an internal communication strategy is.
No matter the size of your company, you will come up against some leaders who will naysay your ideas. Looking back, Erin says she wishes she would have learned earlier how to better voice her opinions to leaders.
I think a lot of times, again, back to the order taking, when you have strong executive personalities or business stakeholders who have done things a certain way for years, and maybe that's their expectation, is to be able to have that courage and that voice to say, you know what, I think with what you're trying to accomplish, this might be a better way to do it. And being able to push back and influence the executives, they expect you to do that. My experience, most of them expect you to do that. They don't really want yes people. And I think when you're early in your career, and myself included, you're so focused on doing a good job and making sure that you are doing what's asked of you that sometimes you lose a bit of that objective thinking and you bury your opinion. It's always there. For me, it's always been there, but it was finding that courage to express that opinion when I'm in a room with people that are much more senior than I am, as well as pushing back when I feel like the direction is going in a way that's not beneficial. So I wish I had known that and learned that earlier. I think a lot of that just comes with experience and courage, but it's a great skill, and it's something that I think everybody needs to learn.
A big thank you to Erin Bergamo Tacy for taking time to share her expertise with us today. We are looking for great guests and episode ideas. Go to internalcommspro.com/podcast and look for the contact form. Internal Comms Pro is produced by Super Awesome Media. Our executive producer is Rachel Foles, Connor Sweeney is our engineer, and Kelsey Rizzuto is our associate producer. Our theme music is Please Listen Carefully by Jazzer via the Free Music Archive. Our intro music is Sea of Glass by Connor Sweeney. Show notes and more are available at internalcommspro.com. Thank you for listening.